Got it.
Okay, welcome to our live from the Burger Paint Me Trash Parsha Shiur, which is not on the Torah reading for Shavuot, which is what we'll read this Shabbat, but is on sort of the ideas of Bamidbar generally. You want to come up here? And we have Nelson and Noam with us in the Paint Me Trash to help us learn some. And so I wanted to think about the desert sort of more broadly, because this whole Sefer takes place in the desert. And I think the setting and the scenery is sort of important because this is the space where we transform ourselves as a people nationally from enslaved people to people ready to conquer the land of Israel. And it is also the place in which we receive the Torah, which we will mark and commemorate on Shabbat. So it seemed like a sort of good crossover between the place we are in the Torah reading cycle and Shavuot. And tonight, the reason I'm here in Shul tonight is it marks the beginning of my father's 10th yahrzeit. And my father was a person who very much loved to be outside. And so it felt like an appropriate thing to learn in his memory about the wonder of the desert. So I will share my screen as well here. Let's see. And we get to see so many tabs. Let's move it out of the way there. We'll make it a little bigger. So this is from last week's Parsha. It's just sort of the opening, the proof that we're in the desert now, right? It says that God spoke to Moshe Bamidbar Sinai ba'ohel moed, right? Not just in the ohel moed, but that somehow the context of the ohel moed sitting itself in Midbar Sinai was relevant or important. And so Bamidbar Rabbah has a lot of suggestions about why it might be relevant that Moshe talks, God speaks to Moshe in the desert, right? It says, Lama Bamidbar Sinai, Mikan Shanu Chachamim b'shlosha devarim nitna haTorah, be'esh u'bamayim u'bamidbar, right? That we learn from here that the Torah was given through three things: fire, water, and wilderness. And then it goes through the psukim for a proof of why the fire, why the water. And then here, another explanation, right? Davar acher, this pasuk of ours, v'yedaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai, ela kol mi she'eno osa atzmo kabidbar, hafker, eno yachol liknot et hachachma v'hatorah. The Chachamim say a very bold thing. They say anyone who does not make themselves ownerless like the wilderness cannot acquire the wisdom of the Torah. So there's something about an analogy between the desert, which is ownerless, right? It's not like you own a plot of the desert. If the desert sort of belongs to nobody and everybody at the same time. That's the way that sort of one should be to acquire the Torah. The Bamidbar Rabbah doesn't explain what that means, if anyone has any ideas, but the Sfat Emet gives, I think, a beautiful explanation of what it might mean to make yourself ownerless. So he explains that the Torah, right, is hishlimut hanivraim, that it's the wholeness of created beings, and that there's something lacking, shahanivraim chatzerim be'enei atzman, that we see that we're missing things, umekavin el hashlema zochin la Torah, and that they will yearn for that wholeness, right? So when we make ourselves like the hefker of the midbar, we're saying, look, we have something that is empty inside of us, that we need the wholeness of Torah to complete ourselves. And if we felt complete, if we didn't feel like the midbar, we might not go searching for the Torah, right? So that's why the Midrash says, he explains that you can't have the Torah before you become hefker. And so this was the preparation. Haya hachanat b'nei Yisrael kodem kabbalat haTorah, shehigiu, that they arrived Bamidbar lihiot barur be'enehem v'gam lebarur zeh kol hanivraim shehiyu mikavin al hashlema, right? That when we get to prepare for the Torah, we had to go to the desert. The Torah could not have been given to us in Mitzrayim, and we couldn't wait to get the Torah in Israel because we needed this sort of emptiness to find our way, to find that space. And so how do we prepare for Shavuot is that we somehow have to in some way empty ourselves out, maybe, right? Sort of declare ourselves hefker, find a path to really yearn for the Torah, not to just receive it because we happen to be standing in shul, but to like have an emotional experience, maybe is what I would say. Like, what does it mean to accept the Torah? Where do we fit it into our busy lives, our busy schedules, all of our racing thoughts, throughout the year? I don't think he can knock it over. I think he'll be okay. Noam is climbing the mechitza, some kind of so that's right. That's one way of thinking about it. The Gemara in Nadarim offers us a little bit of another perspective. Right, he says that here Rava says to Rav Yosef that once a person renders himself like a wilderness, right, deserted, the Torah is given to him as a matana, because that this is the gift of the Torah. And the Midrash Tanhuma says that God led the people by way of the wilderness, right? Malichin derech pshuta, right? We could have maybe gone straight. I think we've talked about that before, right? There was like a faster path, but God somehow knew that we needed this roundabout path. And instead of the roundabout path being through cities or being through some kind of like lush forest, God intended to take us through the desert, right? Because God thinks to God's self that as soon as they machzikin ish besadeh ubekerem, that as soon as people take possession of fields and of vineyards, right, of material possessions, mavtilin min haTorah, that they will neglect the law. And therefore, right, he'll go through the desert. They'll be totally dependent on God, right? They'll have to eat the food that God prepares for them and drink the water that God sends for them, so that the law may penetrate their very beings. HaTorah mityashevet begufan, that it like takes root in them. And I think that what is going on here is this acknowledgement that we're talking about the desert as a metaphor in some ways, right? That the desert is hefker, and so we have to make ourselves hefker. But actually, Bnei Israel went in the actual desert, right? And that maybe there's something sort of valuable about that. And it seems like what God is saying is that the material possessions will distract you. As soon as you get there, you don't want to learn the Torah about what to do with your kerem. You're just going to want to make sure that the grapes come in, and it's hard work, right? And maybe there's like a piece of that is about sort of that hefkerness, that no one owns the desert, right? That when you're in a place where you don't have any possessions, it's easier to let things permeate into your being. Eric Fromm, in his book, The Ownership of Self-Realization, I think puts this very nicely. He says, the desert is not a home. There are no cities. There is no property. It is a place of nomads who have that which they need, and all they need is life's essentials, not belongings. Life in the desert is preparation for a life of freedom. Right, that to be free, to be ready to conquer Israel, Bnei Israel had to like really strip all of those things, right? What were they upset about when they left Egypt? That they were leaving the fish behind and the pots of honey, right? All of the sort of material possessions that even as slaves, they appreciated parts of. And here we see that the desert strips us bare. So I think there's something appealing about that to me, right? This idea that, right, especially coming off of Pesach, which is like a detail filled holiday filled with stuff, right? Extra sets of dishes, new spices, new tablecloths, right? All these crazy things that we're saying like enough. We have to actually strip all of that away. To receive the Torah is like a whole different exercise. That's right. That's wilderness as wasteland, that there's like a benefit to being in the wasteland headspace or the wastelands, physically, right? I don't think that Judaism really we don't talk about giving away all of our earthly possessions. We don't live as monks or, nuns sequestered from the world. We enjoy food on Shabbat. We enjoy nice new clothes for Yontif, right? There are lots of ways to express ourselves through possessions. And there's this sort of benefit to stripping ourselves bare. However, I also want to offer an alternative approach to the wilderness. I first read it in Dr. Erica Brown in her, she has a beautiful book about Bamidbar, and she put a piece of it into the Jewish Advocate when the book first came out. And so I brought that, this piece right here. And she says, well, hold on a second. The wilderness maybe is a wasteland in some ways, right? It's a desert. But if you've been to the wildernesses around Israel, right, the south of Israel, knows that the region is better captured by the wilderness, which I thought was a lovely made-up word. It is mountainous and cavernous, often struck by flash floods and hardly monochromatic in color. When I think it was my year in Israel, I saw a flash flood. I don't know if anyone has been to Israel during a flash flood. It's really amazing to see. And your eye, at least, was struck by the power of it, right? If you're not careful, you could get swept away in a second. All of a sudden, there was nothing, and then there is so much, and there's so much noise and color. And
where was it?
It was somewhere in the south of Israel. Like the school had taken us on a tiyul, and all of a sudden they were gesturing us to go to somewhere else. Yeah, and we watched this water just rush through. It was really unbelievable.
It can be dangerous.
Yes, very dangerous, right? And I think there's something about that in the desert that I wanted us to hold on to, Anna, because I think the desert as a wasteland is dangerous in one way, but the desert as a wilderness is also could be dangerous, right? There's a big power to the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Images of nature created by our prophets confirm both the danger and the unsettling sensations of being in the wilderness. There is something about the expansiveness and simplicity of the environment that makes people contemplative and aware of their insignificance. Right? And if you think about it, lots of our forefathers, and probably foremothers, although we don't know, went to the desert and spoke to God. Right, Eliyahu is, I think, a pretty popular one, right? That God's small, still voice comes in the desert and all of this expansive, crazy wildness. But certainly, Yitzchak, right, goes to the Sadeh, La Suach, that there's something about going into this expansive environment that that allows us to find God, right? It's not about being empty; it's about sort of filling yourselves with the significance of God. The enormity of the terrain highlights our smallness, and often in the place of fear, religious awe arises. Wisdom, too, like a spring or sudden flood, rises where least expected. But it is not only the spiritual rawness which is possible in the vastness of the wilderness that leads to knowledge. It is the desire to put order in the chaos which leads to the acquisition of Torah, right? It's not that we become this canvas to be painted upon. It's that we actually we take the Torah, we take it out of the chaos, and we take it inside of us, right? Mityashevet begufan, it comes inside of us. Because humanity feels dominated by the landscape, do we try to overcome this impotence by building structures of human intelligence, right? So we fill the desert with stuff. When we feel sort of overwhelmed by it, we try to conquer the desert, maybe is the way to say it. And I think what Dr. Brown is suggesting is you could sit with that enormity and you could feel a divine experience in that way. And so on this last page here, I brought some wilderness Torah. That's a body of literature. And my father was an Eagle Scout. He was a Boy Scout. We went camping a lot. And when I married Will, my husband, who is also really big into camping, he got us this book of wilderness Torah. And these are some of the quotes that were inside the book. Right, that Evan Eisenberg points out that in all of ancient Near Eastern literature, the Bible is one of the few texts that knows wilderness as a place of majesty, a place where God lets himself be known. Far from rejecting nature, the Hebrew embraces her as a whole, thorns and all. Right, that in Bamidbar, we have this opportunity, right, to find God in the desert instead of sort of just being lost in the desert. Or Ellen Bernstein points out, right, that Abraham, Jacob, and Moses were all called to forsake their settled lives, their homes, and their communities to endure a period of uncertainty and unfamiliarity in the desert. It was only in that unknown that true self-knowledge could be obtained. There they would meet God, discover their sense of purpose, and become Jews. And then I think perhaps wisely and lastly from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, in the wilderness, your possessions cannot surround you. Your preconceptions cannot protect you. Your logic cannot promise you the future. Your guilt can no longer place you safely in the past. You are left alone each day with an immediacy that astonishes, chastens, and exalts. You see the world as if for the first time, right? And I think that this talks about sort of the opportunity, right? There's this great little comic that I saw during COVID times about moving, right? And on one side, this woman is saying, I'm leaving. And when she's in the way, her headspace is about leaving, right? Leaving Egypt, leaving the narrowness of, the bonds of slavery without any sort of positive outlook. All you see is the empty road in front of you. All you see is the wastelands, right? Is maybe how I would put it. But the other side, right? Same woman, same suitcase, same road. In her other mindset of I'm expanding, she's able to see all of the opportunity that sort of unfolds in front of her in a beautiful way. And I think that that is a little bit of what Rabbi Kushner is saying, right? That when we let go of all the things that hold us back, the desert actually is this wilderness place that allows us to expand in a beautiful way. And that is what we are striving for, right? So we can, in this Sefer, and maybe we'll try to look a little bit with this lens, right? We have this opportunity to like lean into the idea of the desert, metaphorically and as a lived experience of a place where we have, we can let go of some of like the things that hold us back, whether it's like old patterns or objects or, a mindset that we don't like, to find that expansive beauty of the Midbar. And I guess I would just finish with a story about my dad, if that's okay. He loved to go on camping trips and hikes. And he once went with my high school before I was in high school. He didn't have any children in the high school, but they were looking for someone to lead a hike. And he was like, great, I'll be there. And he went to the top of the mountain that they were hiking with the kids in the White Mountains. His friend remembers that like they went far faster than the kids who were sort of, dawdling along in their 10th grade selves. And he got to the top of the mountain and he just started taking these like big breaths. And that he turned to his friends and he said, like, I really feel like I'm breathing nishmat chayim, like the breath of air, right? That comes right from God. That the wilderness, the Bamidbar, is a really intentional decision that God makes to take us on that route, to give us that chance to fill ourselves with nishmat chayim, and that's something that we often forget in our less wilderness places in life. And so throughout the book of Bamidbar and throughout receiving the Torah on Shavuot, we can try to find that place of expansion for ourselves. So I hope we can all find that together and in Kentucky and wherever we may be over Shavuot. But I welcome everyone's
very good
ideas, thoughts.
This is not about what you were talking about, but I heard something that you might like. This Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik said this. He said, Israel was our destination, but Sinai was our destiny.
Oh, that's beautiful.
In relation to Shavuot.
Yeah.
And I thought, isn't that so appropriate, right? I thought you might like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? That the destiny, the process is so much more important in some ways than the destination.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And the destination ultimately will be what we make of it, right? But the destiny, that's like what calls us, right? I love that idea that like the Torah calls to us in the desert. Right.
That's our fate, right? That's why we went there.
Yeah. Yeah. And to think that God felt like that was just like the best backdrop, for Torah is beautiful.
Right. Anyway, okay, very good. So hopefully we'll see you.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's a plan.
Yael, one more time, tell me what we're talking about next Tuesday with Parsha.
Next Tuesday, I think maybe I'm not positive. I'm going to stop recording. So I'm not.
Oh, yeah.